The Canaanites in Africa. This here is a biblical study and a historical research talking about the Canaanites in Africa and their importance to literature and history abroad and beyond. In today's world, we're living in what I like to call the information age, okay? And in the information age, you can just look up anything you know right in the palm of your hands. We have Google, and Google have come up with a system for information, whereas to when I was a young man, if you wanted information, you had to do a lot of traveling because you had to go to libraries. And the best that you could do is go to a library, and this library may have your book, but someone may have checked it out, or you may have to go to another library because all of the copies have been checked out or damaged or destroyed or something, right? So you'd have to go to several libraries, college libraries, university libraries, right? Detroit public libraries, to get information. And if you went to the main branch downtown on Woodward, you had access to information. But today, all you have to do is Google up Canaanites in Africa. There's no reason for nobody to be misinformed on today. But in this subject, the Canaanites in Africa, when you look up Canaanites in Africa, this is what I have gotten. A whole bunch of collegiate researchers and peer reviews, right? Researchers about the Canaanites in Africa. And I just want to tap into a couple of these and just to get to show you who these people are. And we're talking about the Canaanites here in Africa. Let's tap onto the Oxford Academic website. It talks about the gift of the land and the fate of the Canaanites in Jewish thought. Cattell, Barthelot, et al. This is a nice book. I like. We're gonna delve off into it and try to take a look at it. We're going to accept all the cookies so we can try to get in here. It says this chapter shows that from the Middle Ages onward, certain Arab historians came to identify the North African Berbers with the Middle Eastern Canaanites. Influenced by rabbinic tradition, which uphold that the Canaanites immigrated to Africa, their accounts are mixed with the other legends that represent Berbers as descendants of Goliath, hero of the Philistines. According to 14th century historian Ibn Khaldun, the Canaanites and the Philistines were all descendants of Ham, and the former helped the latter in the wars against the Israelites. The identification of the Berbers with the Philistines is also found in medieval Jewish sources. In later times, even the North African Jews originating from the Berbers, the Berber regions, even the North African Jews originating from the Berber regions came themselves to be called Philistines. That's Paul Fenton, the author, published in February of 2014. Let's look at the africalswake.com. Did the Canaanites originate from Africa? Let's just tap onto that, just get a good look into there. We're just going to browse through here, right? See what we come across here. We got Egyptian hieroglyphics of black Canaanites. Oh my goodness. Don't y'all know what that is? Can't y'all recognize the Egyptian Kemetic work? That's a Canaanite, and he's very black, and his face has been blackened. Did the Canaanites originate from Africa? Although the exact origins of the Canaanites are unknown, if one believes the Bible, then the ancient Canaanites originated from black Africans, or at least related to black Africans. The reason it can be said that Canaanites originated from Africa is because in the Bible, the sons of Ham, Cush, were in Africa, which was an ancient Kemet. Cush is said to have had a son named Nimrod, who lived in ancient Mesopotamia and who became a very powerful man on earth. He was a great hunter before the Lord. Nimrod is said to have established a kingdom in the land of Canaan. From there, the Bible records that Canaanites spread throughout the region, inhabiting cities such as Sodom and Gomorrah. And that is true. Furthermore, the Bible also refers to ancient Kemet as Mizraim, which is in Africa, as well as ancient Punt or Put, which is Ethiopia, which is also in Africa. According to the theory, the black Canaanites that originated from Africa spread out to established settlements throughout the Levant and became a major trading people. Learn more about the Inga Chronicles in our African Futurium science fiction novel on Kemet and pre-colonial Africa and colonization, and now on Amazon, Kindle, and paperback. That should be interesting. The earliest black African Canaanites that originated in Africa inhabited the ancient Levant, modern-day Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and West Jordan, from sometime before the 15th century up until the 6th century CE. So basically, pretty much, the Canaanites had the Levant, the entire Mediterranean, all the way up until the 6th century CE. The name Canaanite derives from the early Bronze Age city of Canaan, located in modern-day Lebanon. The black Canaanites that originated from Africa were amongst the earliest people to develop urban civilization in the region based on the Kemetic model of civilization. In ancient Egypt, as proposed to by historians like Dr. Clyde Winters and Sheikh Anta Diop, the decline and fall of the black Canaanites from Africa. In the Bible, the Canaanites are portrayed as a wicked and sinful people who were eventually destroyed by the Israelites. The black Canaanites that originated from Africa were eventually also conquered by a number of different people, including the Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans. However, the legacy of the black Canaanites that originated from Africa has continued on through their descendants, who include many Western-day Jews and Arabs. Now we come across Quora. We're going to skip Quora, right? Because Quora is not a real source, although inside of Quora and Reddit, right, blogs like that, there's people who actually kick information and drop information and give sources, but we're not going to go to that. Let's look up Wikipedia. Pretty much talking about all of the stuff that we pretty much went through. Say the name Canaanites is attested many centuries later as the endonym of the people later known to the ancient Greeks from c. 500 BC as Phoenicians. And after the immigration of some Canaanite speakers to Carthage, founded in the 9th century BC, was also used as a self-designation by the Punics as the Canaani of North Africa during late antiquity. Let's pop on the Bible.org. Are the Canaanites black? Are the Canaanites black? The Canaanites were the people who lived in Palestine before the time of Joshua. They included the Phoenicians, and some of them were dark-skinned. They were not black, as were those who later populated some parts of Africa. Ham, the father of Canaan, refers to those who peopled Africa, and after became the name for the Egyptians. Ham means hot and not black, as some has asserted, and that is right, because the Hebrew word for black is a shakur, right? Like Tupac Shakur, right? Shakur. That's what the Hebrew word for black, and Ham means hot, as in the hot lands of Ham, which turned people black. Y'all stay tuned because this is about to get really, really good. I'm going through this for a reason, right? Let's look at, so we got there that we talked about how Canaan's father peopled the land of Africa, and he was one of those peoples, right? I would like to take a look at this one here. Let's open this up. In this book here, this book is published by De Gruyter in 2017. It's called The Excursus 3, Was Canaan Black? From the book Black and Slave by David M. Goldberg, which name signifies that this is a person of Ashkenazic extraction, right? I'm going to purchase this book. This is a very good book, right? It said Excursus 3, Was Canaan Black? It says in chapter 5, we've examined a tradition of a genealogical link between Canaan and black Africans found in found in ancient Near Eastern myth and in various Muslim sources. Do we find this genealogy elsewhere? Of course. One slave cursed Canaan. Of course, once slave cursed Canaan was linked with blacks in the Curse of Ham myth. Such a connection between Canaan and blacks became inevitable. But the Near Eastern Canaan black genealogy was prior to and independent of the curse of Ham. Wow. But the Near Eastern Canaanite black genealogy was prior to and independent of the curse of Ham. Do we find a similar independent genealogy elsewhere? As it turns out, there were several sources that do claim Canaan as a Canaanite ancestry for black Africans. Wow. He said here, as it turned out, there are several sources that claim Canaan or the Canaanite ancestry for black Africans. Wow, I'm just wowing. He said this excursus will investigate the basis of such claims. We will see that such sections either derive from the belief in the curse of Ham or are otherwise groundless for a variety of reasons. West African sources. Several West African traditions indicate a genealogical connection between black Africans and the ancient Canaanites. Several West African traditions indicate a genealogical connection between black Africans and the ancient Canaanites. Mohammed Bello, and we're going to look him up probably just next. Mohammed Bello, 1837, scholar and second Sultan of Sokoto in Hausaland, northern Nigeria, wrote a history of the Yoruba in 1812. He included this account of Yoruba origins. The people of the lands of Yoruba are from the remnants of the people of the BANTU Canaan, who were the tribe of Nimrod. The reason for their dwelling in the West, based upon what has been narrated, is that Arab ibn Qatan drove them out from Iraq towards the west. Then they journeyed between the lands of Egypt and Abyssinia until they reached the lands presently known as Yoruba. In every land in which they passed, they left behind a group of, we're going to have to buy the book to get the continuations of that. But let's look into the footnotes. A lot of times there's some good juice in what we already read in the footnotes. So it says, two Western writers do mention a genealogical linking Canaan and blacks, but they are merely quoting the Muslim sources and are not recording an independent genealogical tradition. Okay. We talking about a Herbalat in his Bibliothèque Orientale, 1867. He's talking about Ham, the page numbers. He said, I often do find the statement under this page in this book, which is Donek, which is quoted by Augustine. Child match in the supplement volume. He's talking about Augustine, talking about Canaan, and him being of Canaan and an African. 1728 to his Dictionnaire the Bible on page 138. Cam and the father Isidore of Seville. D 636. Writers that the Africans and Phoenicians descended from Canaan. He is undoubtedly speaking of North Africa. See Stephen Barney, The Etymologies of Isidore of Seville. Identification of biblical Havilah, the sons of Cush, as the ancestors of the Gaetulians. And references is to the North African Berber people. Now, we open up Dirk Lang's Ancient Kingdom of Western Africa. I hope I wasn't recording all that time. I thought I stopped. But now that we're going, Ancient Kingdoms of Western Africa. Africa Centered and Canaanite Israelite Perspective by Dirk Lang in 2004. This book is price roughly around 59, 60 European dollars in the Journal of African Archaeology. Dirk Lang is an African archaeologist, and people talk about there's no archaeological and historical records. Are people who really don't know history and people who are not following after the modern day historians. Let's read through this. It says, the ancient kingdoms of West Africa, African-centered and Canaanite Israelite perspective by Dirk Lang. In the colonial period, it was generally assumed that the rise of states in southern Africa was a consequence of importance outside influence in classical times. With the independence of the African states, this idea has been discarded in favor of eternal development within African societies. The state of the Sahelian zone, therefore, were supposed to have originated during the medieval period in consequence of the rising trade sparked off by Arabic conquest of North Africa. The only alternative position was that of the Fague of Oliver, who suggested in 1962 a diffusion of the Sudanic states from Mero and South Africa. Since then, there have been hardly any new research trying to look afresh at the enigma of the origin of these states. The book Ancient Kingdoms of West Africa by Dirk Lang takes up the earlier lines of thought. It suggests that sub-African societies owe important cultural input to the Semitic world, which in the Phoenician period stretched from Morocco to South Arabia. Wow. So in the Phoenician period, the Semitic world stretched from Morocco to South Arabia. The massive volume in this collection of Lang's former published studies in English and French, moreover, it includes 3 new chapters in English dealing with the kingdoms of the Central and Western Sudan. These chapters, composed by their number of pages, a book in themselves. They have also aims. Firstly, they present original interpretations concerning the medieval history of these states. Well, that's good. It's good to have original interpretations. And secondly, they follow an innovative comparative approach dealing with their foundation in classical times. So these are old sources. The second part will certainly attract more attention. It suggests that Phoenician slave traders established south of the, excuse me, I suggest that Phoenician slave traders established south of the Sahara and specifically in the region of Lake Chad. Some independent trading posts and garrisons which constituted of the nuclei of the future Sudanic states. Further, there are short exercises on the ancient history of South Arabia and Somalia, showing similar cultural influences, and that is correct. With respect to the ancient period, the book pleads for research in the historical perspective of longue durée by means of comparison between African rituals and ancient Near Eastern myths. The unexpected slow change of clan and state structure in Africa is revealed by numerous impressing parallels between the existing religious festivals in the Hausa and Yoruba kingdoms. An ancient Semitic New Year festival of the pre-Christian era. The book also deals with internal written texts and oral traditions, contrary to the widespread idea that oral traditions are feedback from recent Islamic Christian inputs. It is shown that these legends are so firmly linked to social institutions and festal traditions that they must go back to the foundation period of the states concerned. The volume is divided into 5 regional sections, followed by a supplementary chapter called Addenda et Karinga, which includes a re-evaluation and updating of the author's former article republished here. Sections are comprised, laying early publications on trans-Saharan trade relations by way of Central Saharan trade routes between Tripoli and Lake Chad. Wow, that's a nice direction flow there. Or the Saharan slave trades. These articles are based on field research along the Central Saharan route in 1976 and deal with trade relations in the medieval and modern period. They describe a number of important archaeological sites which set up the now have remained which are archaeological sites which up to now have remained unexcavated. Some surface remains have been dated to the Roman period by earlier travelers and scholarly-minded colonial administrators in the present volume. Lang draws again attention to the importance of Central Saharan route as a continuous and early usable line of communication between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean world. The formally published studies in a section 2, the formally published studies in section 2 testify to the author's ongoing interest in the history of Kanem Barnou. Lang started his career in 1970 by searching for new data in European and Arabic written records. Later, he complemented his research by adding oral traditions and cultural remnants as important sources for the reconstruction of history. Some new remarks concern the shift of the Dagawa to the Sufwa clan family, which is now seen in connection with the local cult mythological setup. Lang goes beyond the regional approach, restricted to the idea of local harrowings between the Nilo-Saharan and Chadic-speaking societies. He attributes the basic institutions of sacred kinship to a common substratum reaching from the Yoruba states in the south to the former Semitic states of the eastern Mediterranean world in the north. It is remarkable which new insights may be gained by such a vast comparative approach. Wow, I agree. Section 3 deals with the house estates. Here he previously published articles. I'm going to try to blow this up. They had it so small, and I'm reading through the phone, but it says Section 3 deals with the house estates. Here previously published articles offer examples of the author's continuous attempts to join out the connection between the traditions of the great religious festivals. Thus, the Bayajida legend is seen as a foundation charter fully embedded in Hausa society, since the king and other officials contribute to reenact it during the Maulud and Ghani festival. However, it exhibits striking parallels with the Israelite story of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. The legend, therefore, must have been transmitted together with the basic institution of the Hausa states. Other aspects of the Hausa section concerns the name of ancient Near Eastern kings in the various written records, in the various written dynastic list of the Central Sudan. Wow. So we got records in North Africa of Near Eastern kings in various written dynasties listed in Central Sudan. Again, the objection that these parallels are chance similarities, impressive parallels between royal rituals of various Hausa kingdoms and Ugaritic myths are pointed out. Additional data in support of an important cultural input from the Semitic world is provided by Lang's detailed historical deliberations on the clues of slave trade south of the Sahara by Phoenicians. Furthermore, the chapter includes the first oral versions of the Beyajida legend in translation collected from the palace officials of Dora. Section 4 focuses on the Yoruba states. The new essay reveals the Canaanite and Israelite cult mythological pattern of the dying and rising God as the underlying principle of the major kingship festival of life. The argument of a Semitic New Year festival surviving amongst the Yoruba implies a considerable longevity of clan and state structures. This is supposed by a description of the 3 most important ritual days of the Yoruba feast. Furthermore, it is, attested? Buttressed. Furthermore, it is buttressed by a belief. Comparison of the main deities of the festival with the Canaanite equivalents. Their Canaanite equivalents. This opened an entirely new perspective on whether anthropological field achieve whether I'm trying to blow this up a little bit more. That's as big as I can get it. Okay. I'm gonna go back. This is supported by a description of the 3 most important ritual days of the Yoruba feast. Further, it is buttressed by a belief comparison of the 6 main deities of the festival of the Canaanites equivalents. This opens an entirely new perspective on a rather anthropological field achieved by painstaking field research in combination with audacious intercontinental comparisons. The reader, however, would like to have more details in order to be fully convinced of the validity of the far-reaching implications of these parallels. Another important achievement of the new approach concerns the interpretation of Yoruba myths in terms of the Ismaelistic world view, perceptible also in Canaanite mythology. The depiction of deities as former human beings could therefore not mislead historians to take the legendary stories at face value and read historical events into the myths actually concerning primordial times. Section 5 deals with the medieval states of the Middle East. Niger. It shows that a thorough analysis of texts in combination with oral linguistic and archaeological data permits surprisingly new insights. Thus, with respect to the history of ancient Ghana, it now appears that the medieval nucleus of the state was in the lake region of the Niger southwest of Timbuktu. Lang puts the history of Gayo into a new perspective by identifying an early 12th century king of the famous stele of Geo Sani, with a king of the dynasty list of the Timbuktu Chronicles. Another challenging aspect of this chapter concerns the ethnogenesis of the Songhai, which is now seen as a result of the struggle of liberation against the 14th century domination of Mali over the middle Niger region. More difficulties to evaluate is the idea of the dynasties, the dynastic shifts of the Almoravid period from Ghana to Gao. This new view on the states of the Middle Niger now will probably prove to be a breakthrough in the historiograph of medieval West Africa. I want to look back into some pseudo Aristotelian records. One of them called Marvelous Things Ever Heard, right? I want to read right here where it says that this work, it is from the Apollonius Paradox Graphus, right? Graphus's Mirabilia period, the 2nd century BC area, around the 2nd century BC. And it is believed that the content of the pseudo-Aristotelian on Marvelous Things Ever Heard originates in the Hellenistic period, which is considered to be around 323 BC to 31 AD, right? It originated in the Hellenistic period, while the final form reflects centuries of expansion, at least as recent as the 2nd century of the Christian era. So this book goes back to at least the 2nd century of the Christian era, and at most the 2nd century BCE. So we're looking at from this book goes back to the Hellenistic period. The Hellenistic period covers a time in Mediterranean history after classical Greece between the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC to the death of Cleopatra in 30 BC. So we're looking at about roughly a 300-year period, roughly, in the 2nd to 3rd century BC. So we're looking at about the 3rd century, basically the 3rd century BC till around 30 BC. And that is considered the Hellenistic period. So we're looking at roughly around 300 to the 2nd century to about 200 BC, right? Around 200 BC, the 2nd century, that this writing goes all the way back. What writing was we talking about? We're talking about the Marvelous Things Ever Heard. Note that we see that according to the Revised Oxford translation of this complete work of Aristotle's treatise, the spuriousness has never been seriously contested. So nobody never contested the authenticity of these writings. We're going to read section 84. I took y'all all the way down through that so we could go down through section 84. Notice that anything that deals with African people, right, is placed heavily under scrutiny in the eyes of European scholars. Luckily, this have not been scrutinized. Okay. Now we read right here in section 84 of Marvelous Things Ever Heard, Aristotelian Chronicle. It says, in the sea, outside of the pillars of Hercules, they say that a desert island was found by the Carthaginians, having woods of all kinds and navigable rivers, remarkable for all other kinds of fruits, and a few days' voyage away, as the Carthaginians frequented it, often owing its prosperity. As the Carthaginians, so we see here it said it owing to its prosperity, and some even lived there. The chiefs of the Carthaginians announced that they would punish with death any who proposed to sail there. So as some even lived there, the chiefs of the Carthaginians announced that they would punish with death any who proposed to sail there, and that they massacred all the inhabitants, that they might not tell the story, and that a crowd might not resort to the island and get possession of it and take away the prosperity of the Carthaginians. There's a lot of meat in this historical record. Whether Aristotle wrote this or not, right? Most likely he did not. But it's still an ancient Greek Hellenistic record going back to the 3rd century BC. And this 3rd century BC account speaks of this island, a desert island outside of the Pillars of Hercules. And how this desert island, right, it was founded by the Carthaginians, the Africans, the Canaanites, the North Africans. And this land having woods of all kinds and navigable rivers. Remarkable for all kinds of fruit, and a few days' voyage away, which is poetic speaking, as the Carthaginians frequented it, often owing to its prosperity. And some even lived there. And the chief Carthaginians would punish you with death if you would even come over to these lands. And they would massacre all the inhabitants that they might not tell the story. This land was none other than the Americas. And they killed anybody who took possession of it or came to it, because they didn't want the story to get out about these lands over here. Because if they didn't want the crowd to get resort to the land, right? They didn't want the crowd, which later happened, the Europeans, and they did resort to land, and they did possess it, and they did take away the prosperity of the Africans with this particular land. And this land is none other than the Americas. As we can see here, in the very first sentence, it said that this island here was founded by the Carthaginians. So we can see in section 84 of the Marvelous Things Ever Heard, this is an ancient account, and we can see that it has been known and believed that by the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, the very old Greeks, right, that the Africans, the Carthaginians, founded the islands with the S, I'm going to conject, but a desert island. And this island, I contest to you, is none other than the Americas, because there is about, from my records and research, I've counted 20 islands on the other side of the Mediterranean, on the other side of the Pillars of Hercules. Outside of the Pillars of Hercules, I've counted 20 islands. And 19 and 20 was South, 17, 18, 19, and 20 was South Central and North America. And none of these other islands, the smaller islands, fit the description as the Americas. The Americas is the only islands that fit these descriptions to a T, outside of the Pillars of Hercules. You have islands like Sao Tome, right? You have Cape Verde. You got the Azores, you got Jamaica, you got the Caribbean, all of the Caribbean islands, Haiti, you got all of these, Venice, what, Nova Scotia, you know what I'm saying? You got all of these islands that you have to go through just to get to this big desert island. Now we're going to look further back. And this is how you do research in history. Now we want to look in Diodorus' book, The Library of Sicily, The Library of History. Diodorus Siculus, which is known as Diodorus of Sicily. In 19 of his book, The Library of History, book 5, right? What's that, chapter 19? It says, now that we have discussed what relate to the islands which lie within the Pillars of Hercules, we shall give an account of those which are in the ocean. For there lies out in the ocean, in the deep, off Libya, an island of considerable size, and situated as it is in the ocean. It is distant from Libya, a voyage of a number of days to the west. Its land is fruitful, much of it being mountainous, and not a little being a plain level of surpassing beauty. Through it flows navigable rivers, which are used for irrigation, and the islands contain many parks planted with trees of every variety of gardens in great multitudes, which are traversed by streams of sweet waters. On it also are private villas of costly construction, and throughout the gardens, banqueting houses have been constructed in a setting of flowers, and in them the inhabitants pass their time during the summer season, since the land supplies in abundance everything which contributes to enjoyment and luxury. The mountainous parts of the island is covered with dense thickets of great extent and with fruit trees of every variety, and inviting men to life amongst the mountain. It has cozy glens and springs in great number. In the word, this island is well supplied with springs of sweet water, which not only makes the use of it enjoyable for those who pass their life there, but also contribute to the health and vigor of their bodies. There is also excellent hunting of every manner of beast and wild animal, and the inhabitants being well supplied with this game at their feast. Lack of nothing which pertain to luxury and extravagance, for in fact the sea which washes the shores of the island contains a multitude of fish. Since the character of the ocean is such that it abounds throughout its extent with fish of every variety. And speaking generally, the climate of the island is so altogether mild that it produces an abundance of fruit, and the trees and the other seasonal fruits for the larger part of the year, so that it would appear that the island, because of its exceptional felicity, were a dwelling place of a race of gods and not men. Chapter 20. In ancient times, this island remained undiscovered because of its distance from the entire inhabited world, but it was discovered at a later period for the following reason. The Phoenicians, who from ancient times on made voyages continuously for purposes of trade, planted many colonies throughout Libya and not a few as well in the western parts of Europe. And since their ventures turned out according to their expectations, they amassed great wealth and essayed to voyage beyond the Pillars of Hercules into the sea, which men called the ocean. And first of all, upon the strait itself by the Pillars, they found a city on the shores of Europe. And since the land formed a peninsula, they called the city Gadira. In the city, they built many works appropriate to the nature of the region, and amongst them a costly temple of Hercules. And they instituted magnificent sacrifices, which were conducted after the manner of the Phoenicians. And it came to pass that this shrine had been held in the honor beyond the ordinary, both at the time of its building and in comparatively recently days, down even to our own lifetime. Also, many Romans, distinguished men who have performed great deeds, have offered vows to this god. And these vows they have performed after the completion of their successes. The Phoenicians then, while exploring the coast outside the pillars for the reason we have stated, and while sailing along the shores of Libya, were driven by strong winds a great distance into the ocean. And after being carried, and after being storm tossed for many days, they were carried ashore on the island we mentioned above. And when they had observed its felicity and nature, they caused it to be known to all men. Consequently, the Tyrrhenians, and the time when they were masters of the sea, proposed to dispatch a colony to it, but the Carthaginians prevented their doing so, partly out of concern lest many inhabitants of Carthage would remove there because of the excellence of land, and partly in order to have ready in it a place in which to seek refuge against an incalculable turn of fortune. In case some total disaster should overtake Carthage. For it was there, though, that, since they were masters of the sea, they would thus be able to move households and all to an island which was unknown to their conquerors. But since we have set forth the facts concerning the ocean lying off Libya and its islands, we shall now turn our discussion to Europe. As we can see here, Diodorus talked about it's Roman now. The ancient Greeks and the Romans have known about these lands in the Americas, and they talked about how the Phoenicians, the Canaanites, these Africans which were connected to your Akan people, your Ashanti, your Bantu, and Yoruba people. These people, African people, were the first discoverers of these Americas, and the account that Diodorus gave is much, much like the account of Kenken Musa. Kenken Musa, and Ibn Bakari. The stories much sounds very much like the stories that was told by Mansa Musa about the coming to the West and the discoveries of these lands called the Americas. Look at notes of the state of Virginia, right, by Thomas Jefferson. You can slow this down, you know, for your own records. And you talk about the navigable rivers, right? The Roanoke, the James River, the Elizabeth River, the Nansemond River, the Pagan Creek, the Chickahominy River, the the Appomattox River, the James River, the Rivanna River, the York River, the Pamunkey River, the Mattapony River, the Piankatank River, the Rappahannock, the Potomac, the Mississippi, the Missouri, the Illinois, the Kaskaskia, the Ohio, the Tennessee, the Cherokee River, the Cumberland River, the Wabash River, the River Green, the Kentucky River, the Great Miami, the Salt River, the Scioto River, the Great Conaway River. Wow, that's almost like Canaanway River, right? The Hocking River, the Little Conaway River, the Meekingung River, the Ohio River, the Pitford River, the Monongahela River, the Allegheny River. Let's talk about the mountainous regions, right? You can slow this down to read this on your own, to get a more in-depth reading. So I'll make it a little slow for you. Different cascades and caverns, caves. All of this stuff here fits the description of the ancients. Gold, iron, copper, all of the precious resources. This is what made the Carthaginians rich. All the medicinal springs. Wow. Y'all didn't know about that. Didn't that fit that description where it talked about the waters that they got in and made them young and kept them healthy? Remember that? The medicinal springs. There are 2 springs in Augusta near the first sources of the James River, where it's called the Jackson River. Look at this, y'all. Hot spring rivers. These people went through, it was the undertaking to discover America and to enslave its original founders is something that we need to pay attention to in history. Because when a slave is conquered, right? When a slave is made, a nation, a slavery on that magnitude, a nation is conquered. And the nation that is conquered, this is all of the different trees and fruits and herbs. I mean, this is something that indigenous to this land, the vegetation. Look at this stuff, y'all. In this book here, we have what is called a book by Michael Bradley, an introduction by John Henry Clark. This book is called The Columbus Conspiracy. I want to take y'all to page 17. He says, a writer, Seneca, the Roman writer, also speaks of a true continent across the Atlantic that actually bounded and contained the real ocean. Our word continent derives, of course, from the concept of a land, barrier, or dike that contained the true ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules.
Hey, Dad. I want to know if you're ready to get dropped off.
Beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Men of the Mediterranean were fully aware that their little sea was but a pond compared to the ocean that lay westward from the Gibraltar. These accounts are admittedly both vague and somewhat generic in description, yet we cannot doubt that the writers possess fairly detailed knowledge of a Carthaginian Phoenician discovery across the Atlantic, even if the geography of the great island was hazy. The tendency of 20th century scholars have been to debunk early claims of the discovery and colonization of a new world. They have argued instead that the Carthaginian Phoenicians and the Iberian Celt mariners were recruited or enslaved, merely discovered the Canary Islands and possibly Cape Verde Islands off the coast of Africa, but did not actually cross the Atlantic to the Americas. It is becoming increasingly clear, however, that it is modern scholarship that needs debunking. There is no doubt that the Carthaginians and Phoenicians did sail southwest along the coast of Africa and planted numerous colonies on the way. The ruins of Lexus in present-day Morocco demonstrate the scope of this ancient Punic undertaking because the city of Lexus, judging from its ruins, seems to have been larger than Carthage itself. Yet, we know absolutely nothing about Lexus because the ruins have never been excavated. The crumbling remains of the huge Atlantic seaport continues to disintegrate beneath an inexorable undergrowth of mangrove swamp and papyrus reeds. The sheer size of the Lexus ruins mock both our knowledge and our ignorance about what may have been accomplished on the Atlantic when Rome was but a collection of huts. I'm gonna read this to the underlining. I'm gonna stop. It says modern scholarship is correct On one point, the Carthaginians and Phoenicians also discovered the Canary Islands and very possibly the Cape Verde Islands too. There is absolute proof that Carthaginians reached the Azores in 1753. An ancient earthenware pot full of Carthaginian coins was found after a severe storm within previous unknown coin ruins on the back of Carvo on the Azores Islands. These coins dated from the decade of 330 to 320 BC and were so numerous that they were comprised almost a full set of Carthaginian coinage from the particular decade. This will conclude the series of Africans in Africa, Canaanites in Africa, and their importance to the world. Canaanites in Africa and their importance to the world. This is Yasha Ben Yishrael signing out. Shalom, shalom.